as ever, if I can just ask you to go on to mute. The start of the meeting, we have the joy of the Going the Extra Mile Awards, and we've got hopefully Annie, Charlie and the Breast and Orthopaedic Clinical Management team with us today. So what I'll do is I'll start off first of all with our clinical Going the Extra Mile winner, Annie Foster, and I'll just read out the nomination. The Winter 2021 Clinical Going the Extra Mile Award was awarded to Annie Foster, Special Care Baby Unit Nurse, after being nominated by a member of the public for showing attentiveness, kindness and respect always, and for demonstrating the trust values by going out of her way to meet the needs of her patients. The nominator said how Annie is a credit not only to herself but also to the trust, and wanted to recognise Annie for the difference she can make to their journey. The nominator finished by saying how immeasurable Annie's care was, and that I really appreciate that they met someone so experienced, kind and knowledgeable. Annie, enormous well done. You are the Clinical Going the Extra Mile Award winner, and thank you very, very much for everything you do. Then our
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
Then our non-clinical winner is Charlie Wilson. And Charlie is a switchboard telephony operator, a job my mum used to do, Charlie. So I have the highest regard for everything you do. And Charlie was chosen as the latest non-clinical Going the Extra Mile Award winner for her support and direction to patients and visitors. The nominator said that Charlie excelled in the virtues of care, consideration and help, and that it was down to her assistance and help that as a result the details were discovered. The nominator also commented that Charlie was above and beyond, or went above and beyond, the call of duty to support a family that was distressed while providing essential support. Charlie went the extra mile by contacting different departments and teams, whilst liaising directly with the patients involved to find the answers. She was patient and attentive, and it was her interjection that meant the right course of action was followed. Charlie, you are the non-clinical Going the Extra Mile Award winner. Thank you very much. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And then the team winner is the Breast and Orthopaedic Clinical and Management team. And that was awarded after they received a nomination for consistently going beyond expectations. The nominator said how the team are extremely hardworking and work like a family unit. They communicate well and share information in a professional manner. The nominator also said how they are a cohesive unit working together. One example being how they supported ITU during the COVID pandemic and assisted the elective recovery. So the Breast and Orthopaedic Clinical and Management team, you are the team Going the Extra Mile Award winners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Big round of applause. So team, thank you all for your hard work. You do have the advantage in these digital times of not having to have your photograph taken with me or Glenn. But again, thank you very much for everything you do, and take care. You're very welcome to join the rest of the board, but equally I'll understand if you've got better things to do. So, moving on, for members of the public who are joining us now, the board have already had a busy board workshop. We've covered a variety of different things, including our work with the different network leads. We've had a session on a digital hub update. We've had a session on our work in different areas, so a busy morning already. So, apologies for absence. We have Sue Whelan Tracy. Thoughts with Sue on a recent family loss. Any new declarations of interest? Please raise a digital hand. Becky?
Yeah, just a note that I work for SWFT and Warwickshire County Council as well.
Okay, great, thank you, Becky. And Pranjit, I think you've got a change in your declarations of interest.
Yes, I have. I am no longer a practicing GP anymore as
Okay.
of this April.
That's a loss to your patients, no doubt, Pranjit, but
Well,
it's good to
thank you
still
for saying
have
that.
knowledge with us. So if there are no others, the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of April. Any amendments, and colleagues, please raise a digital hand. I can't see any digital hands raised, so I take them as accurate. So we'll then go to page 20, I think, which is where the action points arising are. And the first was on the green plan. And that's the green plan updates to be scheduled for September and March of each year. So that's on the forward calendar. Thank you, Sophie and Sarah. And then Adam to be invited to a future board workshop to review the smart technology evaluations and the work undertaken so far. As I said, we did that this morning. Then on the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians report, a breakdown of professional groups who have attended the civility training to be sent to Yasmin, and that was done. Thank you, Sue Pike. And then the first annual finance plan and contracts for 22-23, Kim to provide further detail on what the trust funding was and cost pressures, and that was done. Thank you, Kim. Then on the annual review of key KPIs, absolute numbers to be used as well as the percentages, and that's been done. Thank you, Harkamel. And also on the integrated performance dashboard to liaise with the information department on the requested amendments to the dashboard to remove the colouring from the maternity measures and amendments made to the CQC domain. And that was done as well. Thank you, Harkamel. And similarly, Harkamel and Sue needed to discuss the target for the 28 faster cancer diagnosis, and I think in the circumstances that's been rearranged. Thank you, Harkamel. And then on the Ochingdon maternity visit update, to submit the feedback reports from NHSI when that was available. That's included in today's report. Thank you, thank you, Glenn. And then on the BAF and risk quarterly report, we discussed the risk assurance framework again this morning. And that was just to ensure that the colouring was used in a different way, and that's been completed as well. Are there any matters arising that I've missed? Fiona, I did see your hand up, but it's now been taken down.
Yeah, so that I was going to come in on the integrated dashboard and the maternity measures. It is a slight difference to the action that was logged there. I'm presenting a summary of the Ochingdon 2 report as part of the agenda of the board. But one of the recommendations from that is that we put a hold to continuity of carer. That is still in our dashboard at the moment as a percentage target, so that will be amended next time. So it's whether you want to log it here as an action or bring it in when I make that commentary later.
Let's do it later when you're making that commentary. I think it will work better for the minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
Any other matters arising that we've missed? Okie dokie. So we first of all have up the annual board declaration of going concern. At its simplest, Kim, are we a going concern?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to pull out from the report?
No, just to formally ask the board to endorse the Audit Committee's recommendation that we're a going concern. That's it.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions or perspectives on the board declaration of going concern? Okie dokie. If you're not happy to approve that, please raise a digital hand. Okay, can't see any digital hands raised, so we'll take that as confirmation. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. And then the annual board self-certifications, the GCG6 licence conditions. always find it a whole mouthful, certifications and the G6 licence conditions. Sarah?
Thanks, Russell. So in accordance with NHS improvement guidance, the board is required to consider the self-certifications for condition G6 of the NHS provider licence on an annual basis. So this report includes the statements and the evidence to support each statement for the board's consideration and certification. The Audit Committee has reviewed this report and supported that the board's certificate, I can't say it now, Russell, certify each statement.
Okay, great. Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
I'd like you off as well. Rosemary, you're entirely happy with this? Okay, thank you as Chair of Audit. Any questions on these self-certification statements? If you're not happy to approve, please raise a digital hand. Okie dokie, so duly approved. Thank you, Sarah. So we're then on to the Chief Executive's report. Glenn, how are you seeing things?
I think you missed one, Chairman. You need to go back one.
Oh, I apologise. I got too excited. What have I missed?
It's item 6.3, Russell, the corporate governance statement and other declarations. It's a similar report to the one I've just done.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a separate report. It captures the self-certifications for the corporate governance statement and other declarations. Again, it includes the statements and the evidence to support each statement for the board's consideration and certification, which has also been reviewed by the Audit Committee, and they're happy to support the board's approval.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
that's included in Appendix A. So, Rosemary, I can see you nodded. Are you happy to confirm as Chair of Audit you're supporting that? If you're not happy to support that self-certification, please raise a digital hand on corporate governance. Okay, duly approved. In my excitement, I was trying to canter towards Glenn's Chief Executive's report to give us his perspective on how he's seeing things. We've now reached that point, which is often the highlight for, I'm sure, members of the public as well as the board. Glenn, how are you seeing things?
I think I say this each month, there's always a lot going on, but there's a few things in my report I'm going to refer to specifically, but also actually in addition to what's written down, colleagues will probably be aware that the Health and Care Bill was granted royal assent last week. So we march forward now for implementation from the 1st of July. And I don't know if anyone noticed, there was a press release that went out with the Health and Care Bill, which referenced the work that we've done here in South Warwickshire with ourselves and our local authority colleagues around discharge to assess, and some of the improvements in flow and discharge that we've witnessed there. And there were only 2 sites quoted in that press release, and it was all about how integrated care delivers for patients. So it's really good to see us getting some recognition there. And the main thing actually on today's agenda is the Levelling Up report, which Anne will introduce later. So some great things going on. In my report, though, I refer to the Ochingdon review of maternity services, and last month I spoke a little bit about this within this report. Is some more content on that, but also later on in the agenda we come back to our progress against the original Ochingdon review and some of the other learnings from maternity service. I think sadly this is not the last report we will see about safety in maternity services, because we do expect to see some others relating to some other services around the NHS later on in the year. And this report makes 15 immediate and essential action recommendations for the entire NHS, as well as 60 local actions for that particular organisation. And as we discussed last month, this isn't just to be seen as a learning opportunity for maternity services. It's all about governance and openness and culture in the NHS, and therefore we will take whatever learning we can across all of our services. I then refer to infection prevention and control guidelines. There's been some changes to the national rules, and they keep tweaking them. What we've tried to do is take a balanced local perspective on that, and we've done that across the group and also in collaboration with other partners in our integrated care system, and implemented some changes, some of which go actually further than the national guidelines, and some are slightly looser than the national guidelines. And these, just to re-emphasise, are very much clinically driven within our organisation and will help us to, and already are helping us to regain some flow and to continue to do really well on our elective recovery, which we'll cover off later on the agenda. I then refer to the research collaboration with Warwick Business School. We talked a lot about the work we've been doing with Warwick Medical School, both from a research but also a teaching perspective. But the business school relationship has those objectives that we set out there, that the attachment at Appendix B identifies really great work that's been going on since the appointment of Dr. Sarah Woolley back in November. And I caught up with her and team a few weeks ago and was bowled over by how much they've been able to achieve in quite a short period of time. And this goes alongside our kind of heightened research culture and our plans to be a university trust. Then there's some detail on some of our great teams. Radiology, often the unsung heroes of what goes on through our diagnostic pathways, huge volumes of activity through the radiology department, and actually being able to maintain that 6-week standard, which I can confirm if you look at other parts of the NHS, they are simply not delivering at the moment. And that's very much why we've been able to maintain good waiting times, because the diagnostic pathways are just as important as the treatment pathways. And then finally, the report refers to the winners that we just heralded at the start of the meeting of our Going the Extra Mile Awards. So I'm happy to take questions on those items, Chair.
That's great. Thank you, Glenn. Questions and perspectives to Glenn? Okay, Rosemary?
Yes, Glenn, I wonder whether later in the year we could ask Dr. Sarah Woolley to come back, perhaps in a board workshop, to give us an update of the work done today in a similar way that we're looking at digital.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm sure she'd be delighted to.
Okay, that's great. And any other questions for Glenn? Glenn, the RTT, how do you think we're doing on RTT and how do we compare?
So so our recovery against the standards set out in the elective recovery programme nationally has been really strong. So we delivered, we ended last financial year with no 104-week waits. The milestone in the plan is to have none by the end of this Q1 of this year. And we're marching ahead to reduce 52-week waits, and we will have done that by most specialties, but probably by Q1 also. There's one or two areas that are a bit challenging. Orthodontics is one of them, but otherwise, on some of those high volume specialties, we're doing really well. As a consequence, one of the things that we're already doing, Harkamel and team have been doing a great job on this, that we are offering mutual aid to other parts of the NHS. Our colleagues in Wye Valley taking some orthopaedic activity. University Hospitals Birmingham will have some really long waiting times for some patients actually who are within our catchment area. So we've been offering mutual aid, taking their treatments into our numbers, and that's something I'm glad you asked, Chair, because as we go through this year, there will be probably some long waits that will appear in our numbers associated with these patients that we're transferring in from other organisations, and obviously we'll be treating them far quicker than they would be treated if they stayed in their host organisations, but they'll appear in our numbers briefly before we treat them, and so we'll make sure we're really transparent about what those are and where they're happening. But by doing that work, it also brings in income, which is part of the plan for this year, which will allow us to be the right side of break even as an organisation. So it's a good thing for us, and it's a great thing for those patients.
Absolutely, and as part of a national health system, it's part of our obligations as a leading organisation. And Harkamel, I know you've been intimately involved in making that work, so thank you very much. I think on occasion some colleagues in the system have got a little bit confused as to the way to understand the way this process will work, but well done on the way you've handled things. Okay, team, any other questions to Glenn? Okay, we'll move on then to the integrated performance dashboard, including the mortality update. Anne, do you want to introduce this for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the integrated performance dashboard covers the period March 2022. The exec colleagues have drawn out key points relevant to their sections on the dashboard. And if I may, we'll note a new addition to the front sheet around the relationship to the board assurance framework and risk register, and any entries to the risk register. So this is part and parcel of our ambition to become a more risk-enabled organisation, and we will, through our work in the refreshed corporate risk management group, start to see this section of the front sheet being populated, so giving much greater assurance around our review and also our link to finance and performance. So I'll hand over to my colleagues, if I may, Chair, to go through the relevant details.
Okay, so just before we get there, Anne, what's worrying you most at the moment, Anne?
What's worrying me most? I suppose it's the sustained demand. And you know, we had a good bank holiday weekend, but it is continuing to see that pressure and staff's ability to and continued introduction of new ways of working at the same time. So it feels like we're doing both. We're doing the innovation and the change, implementing new ways of working, while at the same time dealing with the day-to-day and the continued and stabilised, in some respects, demand through our front door.
Yeah, no, great. We'll come back to that maybe when Harknell's talking in particular. Colleagues, happy to move on to Fiona? So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Keep it brief today because actually the quality and safety commentary and KPIs in my report are very similar to previous ones. That it's very stable position with the majority of the quality indicators that we look at with consideration here, still in a safe position. Our harm rate from falls has gone up, but it's not outside of normal limits, so I'm not concerned about that uptick. And as I referred to earlier, we will change the continuity of care target on the back of Ochingdon 2, but I'm happy to take questions. I've got nothing else to pull out really.
Any questions or perspectives to Fiona? Fiona, just maybe for members of the public who are less familiar with the terminology, can you just explain what continuity of care means in the context of our work with expectant mothers?
Yes, yeah. So this is a model of maternity care that was developed in the Netherlands, and there's quite a lot of research that it improves both the mothers and parents' experience of their maternity care, but also to a certain extent the safety of that care as well. It features it can be as an extreme as a individual midwife being paired with a family and a pregnant mother, and following and being a partner and with that mother and family for the whole of their pregnancy. So right from booking when they're initially pregnant, all the way through their antenatal care, in through their perinatal care and support them to birth wherever their delivery takes place, and then postnatally as well. We as a board have modified that model, which is the extreme model of one individual midwife, to having a team of midwives, of 7 or 8 midwives in a team in a locality across Warwickshire that supports a number of mothers. Again, there needs to be a balance between the safety and experience of that mother and the experience and well-being of the midwife. And if you can imagine, if it is a one-to-one ratio, then that midwife has to be on call 24/7, which is not sustainable for a well-being of that workforce. So we modified it to be a team of midwives, so that each parent will get to know a small team of 7. At the moment, our continuity model that we achieve is on high-risk women of a diabetic or high BMI, and then the low-risk mothers that are going through the Bluebell unit and can be supported to give birth through the Bluebell. We don't achieve continuity for everybody because we haven't got the numbers of midwives currently that would support that, and that's a feature in Ochingdon 2, which I'll go into later.
Very helpful, thank you. And Rosemary raised her hand whilst you were briefing us, Rosemary.
Yes, a further question on maternity, and actually the figures come out in Harkamel's section of the report, but looking at the midwife-led unit, I mean, the numbers of mothers and births in the unit at the moment is really quite low, 26 a month. And I just thought, the time with the Ochingdon, as we're reviewing midwifery-led services, I think it would be helpful to get assurance to the direct, certainly to the NEDs, in terms of the longer term plans for the midwife-led unit, because from both a safety and a financial sustainability position, because I think when we originally set up, it was intended that there would be substantially more people going through there than there are at the moment, and I just think it perhaps just needs a refocus.
Okay. Can we maybe just have a reflect on that and come back to us next month on that specific issue, Fiona? But I think it goes back to the whole sort of focus we agreed as a board a number of months ago, which is our absolute priority is the safe delivery of healthy babies, and everything is subjugated to that primary purpose of our midwifery department. But we'll pick up on it, I'm sure, a little in the Ochingdon report, but let's come back to it specifically as an action next time. Colleagues, happy to move on to Harkamel. So Harkamel, thank you, Fiona, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll start off with our A&E performance in March, very similar to January and February. So we remain in the high 60s, which is kind of where we would expect, but importantly that puts us in the 23rd position amongst type 1 providers. So we're above the 75th percentile. The average for type 1 providers in March was actually 58.6%. I just wanted to point out that March was our second busiest month on record for attendances at A&E at SWFT, only 20 short of the previous peak. When you then combine the things I've sort of said previously around some of our challenges with flow, in terms of beds closed and the way that we're streaming our patients, combined with sickness levels, that was a really, really challenging month for us. And I'm really, really pleased that we managed to improve our performance when compared to other type 1 providers. But the pressure was sustained and flow remained very challenging, and bed occupancy remained above 90%. So medical bed occupancy was actually at 92.6%. We still have a significant amount of patients in our beds who would be better placed elsewhere. So our exit delays, we currently have 43 as of yesterday, and there was an average of 41 in March. So that's certainly an area of focus for us. Moving on then to elective care. So our elective work increased quite significantly in March and reached 2,815 spells. And the only time that we've surpassed that post-COVID was back in July 2021, when you'll remember we were doing the accelerator work. And so there was that real focused effort back then. So combined with our really busy A&E and our really busy elective, this was a really, really busy site for us in March. You asked about RTT performance. We you may remember that we don't have to report that now, but I've kept it on the trust dashboard anyway, because I don't want us to lose focus. So we're currently at 77.81%, which is actually very, very good performance. We're certainly one of the better trusts in terms of our RTT performance, and trying to retain a focus on that. And that's what's kind of highlighted our position in terms of being able to offer mutual aid. Trauma and orthopaedics remains the second best in the country in terms of RTT performance. Our diagnostic performance declined to 95.1%, but that means 95.1% of our patients were treated within 6 weeks. So although we're not meeting the old 99% standard, because that's not a standard anymore, it's certainly where we strive to be, but where our biggest diagnostics are, so MRI, CT, ultrasound, all those patients are still being seen within 6 weeks. So we are doing really, really well on that. And then finally, cancer. So I said before around the 28-day faster diagnosis standard being our key standard. If we can achieve that, then that will certainly help us on our way to achieving the 31 and 62. And we managed to achieve 73% in February against the standard of 75%. And it looks like we should be above 70% for March as well. So importantly, we remain really stable on our cancer performance. And that's what we sort of strive to do when you see kind of peaks and troughs and unpredictable performance. That suggests a level of risk, but we are seeing stable performance against a backdrop of a significant increase in our referrals when you compare us to pre-COVID.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Harkamel. Questions and perspectives to Harkamel. Glenn first.
Yeah, could I just add a further comment on urgent care, because it may be something that board colleagues or members of the public are concerned about, hearing media reports about ambulance handover delays. Our performance on this has been really, really strong. Throughout the day and night, I get an hourly report which shows the number of ambulances waiting outside each hospital across the Midlands and the numbers en route. And our performance remains really strong, but obviously a downside of that is something called intelligent conveyancing, which means that when ambulances are being held up at other sites, some are directed towards us because they'll achieve quicker handover to get back to the next patient. So that's a bit of a downside. And as Harkamel said, that we've got some of the highest levels of patients attending our A&E from outside our normal catchment area. Some of those will be conveyed by ambulance. Some of them actually are coming from the edges of Birmingham because of some of the changes that have gone on around Solihull and access to urgent treatment centres. So it's something we just need to plan for, I think, because I think that slight increase in catchment is probably going to stay with us for a while.
I'm absolutely sure it is, Glenn, and it's like any brand. It's the Swift brand, and the A&D brand at Swift is well known, I think, in the broader geography, and people come to us because they trust us. And David Spraggart.
Yeah. My question about the 31-day cancer target, Harkamel. You mentioned that one of the issues relates to capacity issues. At our last clinical governance committee, we debated this rather generic term as being not terribly helpful. Can you just expand what those capacity issues are? Is it just the consultants, or is it a more widespread issue? Because it could mean absolutely anything, capacity, can't it?
It can. And next month I'll include. Oh, I can hear myself. I'll include a bit of a breakdown if you want, but you'll be pleased to know that at the next clinical governance committee, I've brought urology and colorectal, which are those two specialties with those capacity delays, and we are talking about consultant appointment availability with those. And those two tumour sites are the ones that have seen sustained increase in demand post-COVID.
Okay, that's really helpful. The other issue relates, again, it's been flagged before, is the pathology issues and the impact that has on the meeting the cancer targets. I just wonder what pressure is being put on pathology, and I know they've got some fundamental issues as to why they're not perhaps achieving what they'd want, but in the end it actually is one of the reasons why we're not hitting the targets for cancer that we would, regardless of national targets, the targets that we would want to achieve.
Yeah, and usefully, Glenn went to the ball, didn't you, Glenn, last week?
Yes, we had a Coventry and Warwickshire pathology stakeholder meeting, which has been the first one in a long time, actually. We discussed this at that meeting, David. One of the things that that I was pleased to hear we're finally making some progress on is this digitisation of histopathology. So by the time we get to the summer, all of our images will move away from slides to images, which will speed up the ability to access specialist reporting as well as routine reporting. So that will help. And we're also, Harkamel may have been about to say this, we're about to strengthen recruitment in the consultant team as well, because we're out to an appointment for a general histopathologist post in that team.
That's great.
Okay.
Harkamel, is there anything you wanted to add to Glenn's reply?
Yeah, so it's just to sort of add, there are significant delays, but that's not the only sort of issue. So I think it's just, I think having the in-depth conversation at clinical governance will be quite helpful, just to outline the bits of the pathway that we are really struggling with. I think the stakeholder board was really, really important, and we've actually got a network meeting on Friday to actually go through the SLA and go through the indicators, and putting that rigour back in, I think, will certainly help us. They have also written a business case to update, as in the pathology network have written a business case to update all of the equipment that we've been struggling with for quite some time. So I've escalated that to the coup at UHCW to try and get support for that, because that affects all of us. And they've also recruited an information person, which I think will be the one key thing that will really, really help us in terms of having some of that visibility of turnaround times within each pathway. And once we start to get some of those reports, I'll share those with you, and then we can start working through them.
And again,
Thanks so much.
correct me if I'm wrong, Harkamel, but most of our pathology is done at UHCW, and we have a service level agreement in place. They have, during COVID, those service level agreements were suspended, but now they're not suspended, but there's been a long-term problem with getting a satisfactory level of performance, which we pay for, on those service level agreements. So it's an important issue. Just before I move on to Charles, though, can you just explain to me on the pathology page, we have a column, all cases, and a series of percentages. It's clear what the other percentages mean, but what does the all cases, is that within 10 days?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if I take an example on dermatology, in 10 days on all cases, we only get the results back 26% of the time. But in haematology, we get the results back 80% of the time. Is that correct?
That is.
That's super, thank you. And Charles?
Yeah, I just felt a word of recognition was in order, you know, given the very sustained emergency pressures really since last October, that all the clinical teams and indeed, you know, my colleagues, Harkamel and Fiona, and the managers climb the mountain every day to get those patients through and get the discharges. And it's been a fantastic effort, I think, from everybody.
No, absolutely. Well said, Charles. And people like Martin Smith and Rose down on the front line, it's a great team under enormous stress. And as you say, Charles, enormous thanks from the board on behalf of the citizens of Warwickshire for the work they do day in, day out. Okay, thank you, Harkamel. We'll move on then to Gertie. Gertie, what would you like to pull out of your report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief because I think the report pretty much speaks for itself. Recruitment continues to be a significant area of pressure and risk for us. We've got a real focus on registered nursing and clinical support workers, and it's really positive to see we've relaunched open days in recruitment. We've had some really positive support from the clinical teams on that, so thank you to Fiona and the nursing teams. You can see in there some really positive work in terms of improving recruitment turnaround times and time to hire, following a piece of streamlining work that we've been working on since before Christmas. And again, thanks to Fiona and her colleagues in nursing for assisting with that. Setting out some international recruitment plans in terms of our ambitions to fill the gap that we currently experience, along with, you can see references to our apprenticeships and care certificates as well. Other pressure points are around sickness. We are starting to see a decrease in some of the figures we've seen earlier in the year from COVID, but it's still an area of concern, and there's quite a lot of work that goes on supporting Harkamel's teams, the ADOs and the divisions to respond to that. The other things I'll pick out are, of
core skills training, so our training compliance. There are some hotspots, but overall it's really positive to see that despite the 2 years of COVID and the pressure, that we're still maintaining compliance, and that appraisal is faring slightly less well. But there have been some really good positive improvements that the ADOs and the divisional teams have made over the past month or two, and we continue to watch that through FP. I'll leave it at that, Chair. We're more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gertie. Any questions or perspectives to Gertie? Rosemary?
Hi. Gertie, I just wanted to highlight some issues with the workforce measures in the summary schedule, whereby the staff turnover rate figures look a little odd, in that there's a target set of 10%, where we've got monthly turnover rates of 1.2 and up to 2.5% or 2.1% for the current month. However, I think we're looking at monthly figures versus annual figures, and I think it would be much better if we were looking at annualized figures, because I think that would give us more cause for concern about the relatively, well, the high levels of turnover that we have now.
You're absolutely right, Rosemary, and it goes to show that we need the helpful eyes of our colleagues to show us what we haven't noticed ourselves. We've got a 12-month rolling target, and we're reporting the in-month position. So I will pick that up and we'll amend it with the team, just to be clearer with the board and members of the public moving forward. But thank you very much for helping with that, Rosemary.
Thanks.
And the more that we can get into the detail of what's causing people to leave the organisation, particularly in some areas where we've got a very high level of turnover, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, we've just said at a previous board, and I've committed to bringing something back later in the year when we've done a deep dive. So absolutely, it's a really important area for us to focus on. Retention is equally as important as recruitment. Yeah,
it's much cheaper to retain someone than recruit someone. Pramjit?
Thank you, Katie. Just about the appraisals for medical and dental staff, can you clarify, is that when you say staff, everyone who's on the register at SWFT, so FY1 and FY2, right up to the consultant level?
Yeah, they'd be the appraisals that are linked to Charles as the RO. So yes.
Right.
Well, yes, for all consultants and doctors employed by the trust, but not necessarily those that would be working through Health Education England as their RO.
Right. So those appraisals are not counted here for them, because presumably for the junior doctors in training, they should be 100%.
Absolutely, they should be, Paramjit, but because they're not employed by us, we don't report on them. So this is the F1s, the F2s, those doctors we employ, SAS and consultant.
Okay, thank you.
And my question just is a thought, Gertie, for you to take away and maybe discuss with Anne and Glenn, is whether we should have a network to support women going through the menopause or premenopausal. It's getting obviously a lot of profile at the moment, but some of us of a certain age will have supported partners through the experience of the menopause and being premenopausal. I do wonder if, just in terms of well-being, but also productivity, we shouldn't be doing some more work on how we can support staff. So you can come back now, but I just.
Yeah, it was just to give you assurance, Chair, that one of the 3 focus areas from our health and wellbeing, which we did discuss at management board here and at George Eliot, because we've a joint team, is the menopause and supporting our colleagues. Absolutely delighted to have a network, and we are working across Coventry and Warwickshire for a women's network as well. So there is definitely work ongoing on that, Chair, and we'll happily feedback at a later session if that would be helpful.
Okay, be great, thank you. It's one of the great unappreciated challenges that all women have to go through, which men I don't think often do appreciate the consequences. Let's move on then to the money. Kim, how are we doing on the money? Show me the money.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So this is the year-end outturn report. So I'll take the report largely as read, but I'll just bring out some key highlights. So we've delivered a £22,000 surplus against an original break-even plan, but since then we have reduced this to because of a change in accounting treatment, and we are now reporting a year-end technical deficit of £3.5 million. That's with the support of NHSIE, so they're comfortable with that approach, and they have confirmed that there are no sanctions on our segmentation as a result of that technical deficit. The key things really to note is that the accounts have been submitted on that basis, and indeed we've already got auditors on site. So we're just going through that process at the moment. Our agency spend outturn was £10.5 million, which is £4.5 million above the ceiling that we were set. And that's really reflective really of the increased operational pressures, obviously, and the impact on our staffing that was required. So I think moving forward into the new year, we understand there's going to be more scrutiny. We've obviously anticipated some of that by approving a case in terms of working on our temporary staffing, nursing staffing in particular, in a different way to hopefully to reduce that moving forward. Our cash balance, consolidated cash balance, remains strong at just under £42 million. And in terms of moving forward, we have submitted a break-even plan for the new financial year as presented at the last board. Unfortunately for me, I was hoping the planning cycle was finished, but apparently it hasn't as yet. So there's some further iterations to go through from a regional and national perspective. We continue to work on the financial reset and to deliver on the work programme that we submitted to the board, and continue to support the divisions in terms of working through sort of CPIP opportunities moving forward into the new financial year.
Kim, thank you very much. Questions and perspectives to Kim? Glenn?
Thanks, Kim. As you point out, I think that the agency spend position is something that we just need to look in a little bit more detail on. For me, I'd just like to be reassured that it is associated with more with COVID sickness issues that are hopefully starting to be behind us rather than recruitment, and some of it is non-clinical, isn't it? Because we refer to IT there. So I don't know whether that's something we could just do a little bit more of a drill down into in our Finance and Performance Committee, but it's unusual for us to be above that agency ceiling. So it's obviously an obvious area that we could make some cost improvements on if we could rectify, and quality improvements.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And Yasmin?
Thank you, Chair. My question is similar to what Glenn has asked, just an understanding of what professional groups the agency staff are coming in to fill. So if we have a breakdown of that, and when do we plan to review the mitigation for using the agency staff, and will there be an update coming to the next board?
Just before Kim replies, we did sign off the business case last month, I think, which Kim referred to, which is hopefully transformational in terms of recruitment and use of bank and therefore agency. But Kim, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean there's quite a lot of detail analysis that's shared at a divisional level as well as corporate level. But I think there's lots of ways I can present the information. But what I'll do is go away, I think, and come back maybe at a board workshop to tell the story, I think, and what we're doing, so that we can join it all up together.
That'd be great. At the F&Ps, Yasmin, there's the individual by unit breakdown presented. Any other questions to Kim? Kim, on my page 98 of 431, horrific that there's 431 pages in the board pack, it shows the consultant episodes. And I do find the whole sort of a number of these graphs really interesting, and it's great to see that trend on consultant episodes in total going up. But on the consultant episode per acute whole time equivalent, Can I just ask you to see if you adjusted for absence, which will be, so I think our whole time equivalent calculation is effectively not assuming any absence, whereas the reality is we do have absence. And I think that our level of absence will have increased a lot compared to the start of that graph. It would just be interesting to see what the consultant episode per acute adjusted whole time equivalent would be when you adjust for absence, because I think it will be even more impressive than is being shown in that top right hand graph. Could be wrong, have a look. If I'm wrong, ignore me. If I'm right, then maybe come back next month.
Thank you, Russell. We'll take that away and do a bit of further analysis.
Thank you, Kim. We'll move on then to the mortality review. Charles, anything you particularly like to pull out?
Just to say that the mortality indicators remain within control limits, and I think now we're beginning to see some of the months when emergency activity started to peak, and we're not seeing a significant adverse trend. I think is quite reassuring, and I think that relates, in part to the efforts of the staff, but in part to the fact that we have brought in extra doctors where required, for extra capacity and to make sure that we had more patients that were seen in a timely fashion. The medical examiner for death functions continues to go to strength, and we are actually rolling that out to cover all community deaths, and we've been doing some recruitment. The IT system question, which has hung over us for quite a while, it's now clear there is going to be a national IT system. We're told coming in June, and it will involve some central reporting. So it really is sense for us to use it. Otherwise, we'll be doing dual entry. So we're looking at that. I think the only other thing I'd just like to comment in the data is that whilst all the mortality indicators are actually within control limits, the HSMR isn't as good as the shimmy and the RAMI, and we're going to do a little bit more work to see what that might be. There are methodological reasons as to why these indicators can be different. For example, HSMR is affected by the amount of patients that are deemed to require palliative care, whereas the others don't. But we will look into that. So all in all, I think a pretty reassuring picture, and particularly that we're not seeing the problems that we might have through emergency pressures.
Great, thank you, Charles. Any questions to Charles? I apologise, guys, we're running a little late now, and that's my fault asking too many questions. I think it's great, Charles, we've got the learning from deaths of patients with learning disability. And at another point, it would be good to understand how we can encourage greater use of passports for people with learning disabilities as they access the system. So monthly safe staffing report. Fiona, anything you particularly like to pull out?
Just a couple of things. One is on the back of some feedback from one of our governors, I've included pharmacy in this report, and will be a feature of it from now on in terms of their vacancy and position. They're currently running on a 36% vacancy position, as are a number of our smaller teams of AHPs across the organisation. This was discussed at length at Finance and Performance this month, and there is some significant learning that we need to facilitate between teams. So some teams using real innovation, looking at new roles, looking at new ways of working, and others not taking that step yet, and so we do need to facilitate that as part of the feedback from F&P, but that's all at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Any questions to Fiona on the safe staffing report? Okay, thank you, Fiona. So we'll move on then to the Ochingdon Assurance report. Are you doing this on your own? I was half expecting Linda, Angie and Rachel to be with you, but I can't see them on the line unless I'm...
Yeah, no, they're not, Russell. Apologies. I think there's been some, I don't know, miscommunication. My understanding of this paper was that the responsibility and recommendation from Ochingdon 2 was initially that the public and members of staff and the board had sight of Ochingdon 2 report, and that I facilitated that to ensure that it had as wide as possible reading and acknowledging in terms of the wider learning for the organisation. The link is there. I encourage you all to read it. There are a number of recommendations, as Glenn has alluded to, for maternity services nationally, but there's also definite recommendations and learning for the wider organisation. And what I've asked in our normal governance process, what I've asked maternity to do as part of their quarterly update to board is to update us in terms of their gap analysis and an action plan for CNST, for continuity of care for Ochingdon. That schedule of business was to go to clinical governance this month and then come to board next month. So forgive me if I've read the schedule wrongly, but I thought it was just presenting the report today and then coming up with a more detailed update when they've had time to digest it next time. So you will see that in June.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Glenn, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add for Russell and I, we have 3 board meetings this week. We had the George Eliot one yesterday, and as part of that, there was an assurance report on what is now quite a crowded space, actually, with Ochingdon 1, with Kirkup, Ochingdon 2, and other reports to come. And the suggestion there was that the 3 chief nursing officers across the group could maybe just have a look at how we could make sure that we're giving a good level of assurance, but not an overcomplicated scenario that potentially could lead to us missing key issues. So streamlining it, I think, is a really important thing so that the board can concentrate where we need to put the added effort. Is there any immediate concern from your perspective, Fiona, in having read the report and looked at where we are as an organisation?
No, the report, as if the board and the public read it, there's a number of key themes. One is around workforce, both number and competence, quality of them. One is around governance, triangulation of incidents, complaints, feedback from the public, listening and empowering parents and families to raise concerns as well as staff. Culture of raising concerns, and our risk management processes. I think I think I can definitely give assurance, and based on our external review as well, we have a good culture. Staff are very happy to raise concerns. We have no concerns around parents and families raising concerns and being unable to do that. We do already do a triangulation on a regular basis and have a tracking system through our clinical governance on complaints, incidents, SIs and learning from SIs. I think if the thing that we are working on, and I think there is still a gap, is our staffing. So I've alluded to that in terms of continuity of carer, but there is a big ask in Ochingdon around additional training and time out to do training. And I think that will need some quantification and possibly a balance of risk of how we achieve that based on our financial position, but balancing that obviously with the impact on safety. There's also a reference in Ochingdon 2 around locum workforce and how we supervise those, how they understand our policies and procedures, and how we supervise them in practice. And I think there's a piece of work for the organisation based, we've already talked today several times about our agency use, and as that is an increasing pool of staff that we use, I think it is worth going back and making sure that we've got the right governance around that.
Yeah, great, thank you, Fiona. I think I would strongly recommend everyone, including members of the public, to read the Ochingdon report. It is a truly shocking report. But one of the things I'd just like to emphasise to my non-executive colleagues is there will be certain areas where, as lay people, one is unable to add a particular perspective because one is outside one's competence zone. But when one looks at an issue like midwifery and safe birth, there is the common sense approach, which is the absolute priority of any midwifery unit must be the safe delivery of a healthy baby. And Ochingdon talks often about dogma having affected the midwifery unit at SAT in particular, but elsewhere. So I think particularly for non-executive colleagues, there are learnings out of the Ochingdon experience, which it's worthwhile reflecting on. Thank you, Fiona. Look forward to the next update, and for members of the public to be aware, I'm the non-executive director who's been nominated to work with Fiona on looking after, if you like, our maternity unit. I'm not sure they appreciate it, but we do it nonetheless. The Clinical Governance Committee reported the 13th of April. David, anything you particularly like to emphasise?
Well, the one thing would be, bear in mind the discussion we just had on Ochingdon, one of the key things that comes out of Ochingdon is the importance and value of open culture within an organisation and the willingness of staff to be honest when things aren't going as well as they should. And it was interesting that, I mean, at least two of the reports at the last clinical governance meeting quite clearly showed evidence that SWFT does have that sort of an open culture, because divisions were almost washing their dirty linen very openly and they felt comfortable doing that. And I think that's an important point to actually emphasize, that that we do have hard evidence that the organisation does have an open culture, certainly in the two divisions that we were talking at the last meeting, and I've no reason to suspect that isn't across the whole organisation. So I think that's one thing. When I read the report, it wasn't in my mind, but actually now thinking about it, it probably is an important thing to flag.
Okay, thank you, David. Any questions to David? And it's worthwhile remembering a mantra we often talk about as a board. We might be rated as outstanding by CQC, but we are relentless in our pursuit of excellence. And that does mean having a learning culture and being very open about where we're not good enough. Moving on then to the Audit Committee for the 13th of April, including the self-assessment. Rosemary, anything you particularly like to pull out?
Just a few points to highlight, because we're, in terms of the audit cycle, just coming into the external audit period. So a number of internal audit reports. So the internal auditors give us a annual report based on all their work that they've done to date. And the positive news is that we received that, and which provided the trust with significant assurances over the trust systems of internal controls. So which supports our discussions that we've had so far today and earlier. One point which they did highlight, they raised concerns over the very limited implementation of recommendations over patient access plans. This was a review that they carried out 2 years ago, and the implications of COVID, etc., meant that their recommendations had not yet been put in place. This is concerning because obviously it impacts on patient safety and referral times and patients being seen. So I think it's really important that The board, through the various committees, keeps some focus of that, both through clinical governance, Audit Committee and F&P from an operational perspective. This is an area which needs focus. Other points I'd just like to highlight: the board assurance framework again provides a level A assessment, which is the highest rating, so good assurance on the governance. Obviously risk management, we had the session this morning. And finally, just information governance and security. The team are confident they'll be able to provide a full standards met sign-off for the data protection and data security and protection toolkit for 21-22. That has to be finalised by June this year, and it's all looking good for this current year. But I just thought it's worth highlighting that, you know, the ever continuing challenge, particularly around cyber for the organisation. You know, they commented to us that, you know, the volumes of phishing and other malicious emails that hit the trust every day is growing enormously. You know, the trust is currently blocking some 25. So we shouldn't underestimate the risks out there, and you know, the team are very focused on ensuring that we have appropriate controls in place.
Thank you, Rosemary. Any questions to Rosemary? Well done, Kim, on the sort of internal controls sort of review. That's clearly your day job, so well done, and please send our thanks to your team as well. Okay, team, so we move on then to the winter look back. Harkamel?
Thank you. I will try and be speedy, I promise. So winter, it feels strange to talk about it after we've just had a May bank holiday, one of our best bank holidays ever in terms of ED performance, but I'll probably say that in April and in May when I do that review, so I'll bring that back. But just to remind you, this is where we thought we would land in terms of our ED activity. So the orange line was our projection, and the blue line is what actually happened. So we got there or thereabouts. We never actually saw the peak of what we thought we would get to, but we were by no means off in terms of a significant volume of activity that we've seen coming through the department. Some of you may remember, but I did a slide on what some of our key challenges we predicted to be in terms of winter this year. And it was really interesting actually kind of looking back and looking at what happened. So I won't go through all of these because you've got it in your pack. But we started off when we started winter planning with a 100-bed challenge instead of a 50-bed challenge. After we'd identified all of our schemes, we ended up at about 23 beds short. And I'd say that feels about right. The thing that we hadn't modelled, I think, within those numbers are the exit delays that I sort of talked about. So at any one time, it certainly felt a lot more challenging than that. And our average bed occupancy was at around 94%, peaking at 98.5%. There was a day when we were actually over 100%, and that was because we were absolutely full everywhere. Assessment areas in ED, the whole there was nowhere to move. So we have seen pressures that we sort of haven't expected. In terms of the other things to just pull out, RSV is quite an interesting one. Certainly, when we started planning for winter, we were really concerned about what the RSV peak was going to look like. There was lots of planning to sort of go into that, and we were really worried that it was going to coincide with flu. And actually, that didn't happen. So RSV actually peaked in late summer with 12 a week in August. We then had a flu spike actually in April with 21. So in terms of like the planning that we thought, we were certainly trying to plan for this event of everybody sort of coming together, and that picture sort of wasn't there, and the complexity, I'd say, changed. It was sort of the same with sickness. We expected to see quite a significant level of sickness, as we had done with COVID and self-isolation. But sickness due to COVID and self-isolation actually peaked in January 2022. But if you take the last 3 weeks of March, there has been an increase in COVID-related sickness. And I think this just kind of goes to tell you the picture that you can't really predict. When we talk about winter, it almost feels like we talk about it as a defined period of a few months, and that just isn't the case. You know, these challenges kind of present themselves in various ways throughout the year. and certainly a lot of the lessons that we've learned throughout our planning for winter we've sort of taken forward, notably the regular MAID events, and the team touched upon that a bit this morning in the virtual ward update, reviewing the criteria to reside, really planning for our bank holidays and making sure that our on-call teams and execs feel really confident going into the weekend with whatever plan we feel that we've got. Certainly, the exit delays have been really challenging, and that work continues with our partners to try and ensure that we have capacity going into that, and that will be a really important part of our summer and winter plan next year. And then just to note that in terms of out-of-area activity, 19.1% of our patients from October to March actually came from Coventry, and 13.9% were further afield. As Glenn alluded to, we have been offering mutual aid through ambulance diverts and trying to assist sort of wherever we can. And there has been one instance of an activation of an immediate ambulance handover protocol, and that's certainly one to watch. In terms of just a look back, I won't dwell on this, but just in your pack, you've got a graph just to show the COVID sort of in South Warwickshire. And just like some of the impact of that, just for interest. But elsewhere, obviously winter is not just about emergency pressures. Throughout that really challenging time, we managed to maintain our elective activity. We didn't cancel a single operation because we didn't have a bed, which I think is a really amazing thing to be able to say. And we managed to meet the ERF for 11 out of the 12 months that we were doing it. We maintained a really good level of virtual appointments, so we didn't let that slide just because we were back to seeing patients face to face, as a number of the organisations did, and we reduced our number of long waiters. So when you think about the picture in the round, I think that's really important to note. And also, I couldn't really illustrate it as clearly, but the increase in activity impacts on everyone, and I think that terminal clean graph is a really good example of what happens when the hospital is really challenged. So the volume of work that our partners are getting through, the cleaning team are getting through is phenomenal to try and turn around some of these patients, managing that significant bed occupancy, a really high level of attendance, and doing all of our electives. You can certainly see the impact of that in that team. We also maintained stability. We're absolutely not where we need to be, but we have maintained stability within our cancer performance. And then we look to the future. So we have a winter planning board because we are already planning so for next year. And there were just a couple of things I wanted to say. The previous COVID waves have coincided with winter, but we've seen that it can establish itself at any point in the year. So it's really difficult to consider seasonality. And also, you know, we've moved out of that phase now. So I think a real discipline for us is going to be how to think about things slightly differently. And as I said, with RSV and flu, to be really kind of considered about the impact of whatever it is that we're dealing with, and try and be to learn all the lessons that we've learned in terms of how we've managed those peaks appropriately, and to not get panicked. I think certainly talking to some colleagues, it can be quite easy to kind of buy into that, and I'm really proud that we didn't do that. I think, you know, and my personal reflection is that we've managed to maintain quite a stable head. We've all kind of worked together. There's certainly been, I think, like quite a few crisis conversations when one or another or one of us have like maybe like panicked or worried, but we've all kind of pulled together, and I think that really shows certainly in terms of our bank holiday planning. And for next year, we currently look like we've got a 40-bed challenge. So I'll leave it at that.
Harkamel, the sort of calmness that you refer to is in no small part due to your leadership style, so well done you. Questions and perspectives, we are running late now. Glenn?
Yeah, thanks, Harkamel. As you can tell, everyone, Harkamel loves a chart. I didn't realise until I heard you say that some of you panic occasionally. I hadn't noticed that. I mean, I think one of the things that this last bank holiday has shown us is that sometimes things are unpredictable, but actually the preparation going into the bank holiday or going into the winter to get ourselves in the best possible position is what really pays off. And there's still, you know, despite the fact that we're talking about urgent care here, it's still there's still more variation in discharge than there is in admission to any hospital in the NHS. There's still scope for us to do more on that. So I think some of the work that we've been looking at around virtual wards that we touched on this morning, some of the advice and guidance to primary care that I know BBC are coming in to film as best practice tomorrow here. I think all of those solutions are helping to keep our occupancy down to something manageable, which delivers that result, which I think is probably the best in the NHS, because I don't think there's any other trust that can say they didn't cancel a single elective case because of beds over the last year. So well done to you and the team.
Yeah, and Fiona, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, well done, Harkmal. The thing I wanted to pull up is we talked at Silver today about the numbers of Omicron BA4 steeply rising in Africa, and so we just to give the board assurance, we have started planning for the next wave that is predicted possibly in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and looking at our IPC guidance again as to what the next phase of that is. The other thing Harkmal and I have talked about is those exit delays, isn't it, Harkmal, and how we shore up the community capacity for next winter, which we possibly didn't reflect this winter as much. That's part of the learning, isn't it? And to the public really about our strategy around left shift. So we're challenging the divisions to think of every patient pathway that we deliver and what can be, what's the art of the possible in terms of shifting that into care at home. And that's a cultural change to both our staff, but it will be to our public as well. So then we need to engage our public in a conversation that the only way that we will continue to manage this continued demand on our services is to think differently about where we deliver that. And it is always better to be in your own home, or nearly always. And so we're going to be trying to push those boundaries.
Yeah, we will need to come back to this. For me, the big learning that we need to ensure we fully take account of as well is on that issue of discharge. Local authorities were funded to basically just take people into home and they would be funded for the packages of care. That funding's been removed from local authorities, and that's one of the key reasons we've got so many people stuck in hospital. It is a nonsense paying £300 a night to keep people in hospital when a domiciliary or a care package costs 30 quid a night. And that issue of funding for local authorities needs either a local solution or a national solution before we get to winter. It is a nonsense having 40 to 60, sometimes 100 of our beds absorbed with people who can be at home. It's a nonsense, and we need to find a way through it. Okay, Tim, I'm going to push us forward, but I do want to come back to those issues that Fiona was talking about, I was talking about in sort of August-ish, September-ish, to make sure we've got those all buttoned down, Harkmal, with our partners in the system. And Becky, you've got a key role to play in that. Levelling up, and really important in terms of our responsibilities to help our population be healthier and have longer, happier, healthier lives. How do you want to handle this discussion, Anne?
It's really the report's there. It's been drafted with partners, as you say, Chair. It reflects the organisational wide strategy that we have developed over the past few years that really focuses on population health, prevention and integration. And now we have this, and we're one of the first, we are the first NHS trust to have done this work with the Purpose Coalition, Purpose Health Coalition. There are other members, other NHS trusts that are members of the Purpose Health Coalition. And then just really, we're already starting to think about next steps. And those are listed in section 2, really around sharing some of our examples from our impact report. And that will feature in a future health disparities white paper. We've been approached to join an Equality of Opportunity Coalition, and that's a group of organisations across business, universities, local authorities and so on, who have committed to going further. And then finally, it's great that our foundation group colleagues, Vivali and George Elliott, have now joined SWFT as members of the Purpose Coalition. So it's really a thank you to all of our partners and staff who have made their contribution to this impact report. So I'll leave it there if there's any particular questions, but this is really feels like the end of something because we've got a product, but it's really the beginning of a significant programme of work, and it's really how we strengthen the work that we've done as a board around inclusive leadership, how we align the work that we're doing around our equality, equality and EDI strategy. And then the work that we're doing around levelling up and our role as an anchor organisation. So some really key work streams that underpin the delivery of our current trust strategy and I'm sure our future trust strategy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for your leadership on this. This wouldn't have happened without your leadership. Questions and perspectives to Anne? Glenn?
I know we haven't got lots of time on the agenda, but just to reinforce how important this piece of work is, because working with the wider determinants of health and levelling that up within our community is really going to help us to tackle health inequalities and tackle some of that demand that we can manage better that we looked at in some of the charts just before. So if anyone's watching this, you've got just 2 minutes to watch a brief video that's available on our website, then have a look at that. It's on our Twitter feed as well, but really good introductory session about it. So thanks for Anne for doing this. I mean, all the work though is ahead of us rather than behind us on this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Anne. Okay, Tim, we'll move on to the summary of ratified policies. Anything you'd like to add to the heating and cooling policy, Anne?
No, nothing to add other than just to note just how our heating and cooling policy has been reviewed and some amendments made to take account of COVID. So other than that, just to take the report as read.
Great, really important policies on domestic violence and domestic abuse. Any questions to Anne? Then we've got the summary of reports for noting and information on safeguarding children. Fiona, anything you particularly like to pull out? You're on mute, Fiona.
Apologies. No, I'm happy to take it as read. I think it's self-explanatory.
No, that's great, thank you. We did have a update from the McGregor Wall team this morning about some of the challenges that team has been coping with for too long, of children in crisis with particular problems where they shouldn't be in an acute hospital setting. And I'd just like to put on public record my thanks to everyone in the McGregor team for their work with children in crisis. Any questions to Fiona? Okay, so I think we're then on to the update for the Register of Directors' Interests. Sarah?
Thanks, Russell. So Kim submitted an update which is captured on the register in bold. Also, I need to update it with Pranjit's update that he's no longer a GP in Coventry, and Becky's declaration earlier on in the meeting, that's already captured on the register. So to formally receive a note, thank you.
Any questions regarding that? Okay, duly noted. Then we've got the non-executive director committee memberships, just for information, which I'll take as noted. So we're then on to the Audit Committee notes of the 9th of February. Anything you'd like to pull out of this, Rosemary?
No, nothing to pull out, no.
Okay, thank you. Any questions to Rosemary? And then David's unfortunately had to leave the meeting, but the Clinical Governance Committee of the 9th of March. Any questions the colleagues would like to ask on that? Okay, can't see any hands raised, so on to any other business. Please raise a digital hand if there's any other business. So move on then to questions from members of the public. I think we've had a couple submitted, so would you care to read them out for me, please?
Thanks, Russell. So we've had two from Roger Lloyd, the Public Governor from West Stratford and Borders. They both relate to the Chief Executive's report. So the first one is there are multiple references to Warwick Business School and research projects. Is the memorandum of understanding with the business school, the medical school or the University of Warwick?
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, the memorandum of understanding was with the medical school, who supported our application for our name change and was linked to our increased research with them. But notwithstanding that, we're also developing the research interest with the business school as well, as indeed we will with any other respected bodies who want to do research with us. So hopefully that's clarified the situation.
Glenn, and the second question, sir?
Thank you. So in Glenn's report again, there's reference on research on long-term conditions. Will this include the after effects of COVID-19 between 3 to 6 months, as well as long COVID more than 6 months? Thank you.
Yeah, there are a number of national research studies on this, and we will always be active participants in such things. So I'm sure we will provide an update on that as those studies continue.
Thanks, Glenn. And we've just got a couple of minutes. Any questions for members of the public who are with us now, if they'd like to raise a digital hand? Jane.
Is it all right for me to talk now?
At the appropriate junction, of course, Jane.
Yeah, sorry I didn't let you know beforehand, but I was reading Glenn's report today, and you were talking about the research at the university, and you mentioned children's centres and family centres, that they're going to do some research on the implementation. I'm particularly interested in that because children's centres were just about demolished not so long ago, and all the fantastic work they were doing has gone, and it's worried me ever since. So will there be any practical outcome from that research, or is it just another paper that's going on the shelf?
Well, all research is for a purpose. So we wouldn't be involved in a study that we weren't seeking to make improvements to the service as a consequence of. So simple answer is it won't be something that just sits on the shelf. If there's some learning from it, then we'll seek to implement it.
Well, I hope you can see a way of implementing it, because the centres have all been closed, and I don't even know what the people do now, and yet they're doing amazing work. So even if you found, oh yes, this is a perfect way to prevent other problems later on, how can a hospital do anything about it?
Obviously, our services are broader than just the hospital. So a lot of our community children's services we're active members in what went before, but also the services that we now provide in the community that have replaced some of those that were in children's centres. So it's very much an interest of ours to further develop those services, and those kind of investments in health and well-being in younger years obviously reduce ongoing demand for the NHS. So there will be learning from that, and depending on the magnitude of that learning, Jane, I'm sure we will bring that back to the board.
Great, the sooner the better. Thank you.
I think just broadening your point a little bit, Jane, I think there have been a whole series of decisions made for funding reasons or other reasons, which are coming back to have real consequences on population health. And the children's centres may be one. Another might be the removal of school playing fields, and therefore children aren't doing the physical exercise that they would have got used to in the past, and therefore children obesity. One of the factors may be driving children obesity levels to the highest in Europe. So the whole work on left shift does require a fundamental funding and strategic reorientation into prevention, rather than curing the problem once it's developed into an acute problem. So the children's centres, I think, will just be one example, but I'm sure over the next 5 or 10 years, if we as a society don't do more work on prevention and preventing people becoming unwell, helping them to live longer, happier, healthier lives with lower BMIs and more physical activity and more social interaction, we will have a tsunami hitting the health system, which will never be able to build enough hospitals to cope with. Okay, we'll come back to it, Jane. Thank you for your question. Look forward to seeing you at our next board meeting, which is on the, Sarah, help me please.
The 1st of June, Russell.
1st of June. And in the meantime, take care, everyone. And if you're still suffering from COVID or long COVID, I hope your recovery continues. Take care, everyone. We will have a 10-minute comfort break board and get into the confidential board at 20 to 4. Thank you.